One thing I'll even say right now, I just love one of Weta's behind the scenes videos showcasing different costume changes of Robbie's ape character as he goes from kid to adult, right? And like it's a turntable, and then at one point he does like a eyebrow raise
I know.
as Robbie Williams does, because it's also a range of movement test type reel.
It's so cool. It's
So funny. You can't do that in any other film, right? So yeah. This podcast is brought to you by Befores and Afters magazine. Befores and Afters magazine is the monthly print mag from VFX journalist Ian Fales. Go in-depth on key visual effects topics with major VFX supervisors, artists and studios. Each issue covers a different area like creature animation, miniatures, on-set VFX and VFX tools. Find your copy at beforesandafters.com/magazine.
This podcast is also brought to you by Hugo's Desk new compositing course. Join today to have access to 150 pre-recorded classes, 50 hours of training, using real production assets covering industry standard techniques with over 200 gigs of showreel material and access to a private Discord channel with over 2,300 students. This course is endorsed by Foundry and has access to a Foundry student license paid separately. Join today at hugosdesk.myshopify.com. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to the VFX Notes Podcast. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and as always, I'm joined by Hugo from Hugo's Desk. Hi Hugo, how are you?
Hi Ian, how are you doing? I'm good.
I'm good too. We are smack bang in the middle of our special 2025 VFX Oscar nominees season of VFX Notes, which is the brand new way that VFX Notes is doing its podcast. I'm really enjoying this format. I hope you are too, Hugo, and I hope our listeners and watchers are as well. It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it's super fun. I like this thing of having a theme, and we are working our way through the themes, and we have some really cool collections of 5 episodes that we have in the pipe to do and to show you all. We can't wait to do them yet.
Yeah. And one extra thing that we're doing this time around is having bonus episodes.
Yeah.
That is Hugo and I going into even more detail about the projects we discuss on our special VFX Notes Patreon. And that's a way that you can support us to do the VFX Notes podcast, but also be involved. You get all this bonus material, including mini apps, early access, extra stuff that we're going to produce and write, and you're part of the community. We'll be chatting to you. In fact, we're already doing that right now, Hugo.
Yeah, that's true. We're really excited with that. And so this is, of course, for everyone to know, like this is a specific Patreon just for the podcast. So it's a separate Patreon from the Patrons we used to have and that we used to have connected to the show. So in there, you can already find some really cool shorter episodes, and we do them every week. And so I'm really excited about this because we can geek out a bit more and we can go in through these topics and actually just talk about certain things that we sometimes we don't have the time to talk on the show. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying it.
If you didn't think that we geeked out enough during the normal episodes, gosh, head to the Patreon where we really let loose, I think.
Yeah,
I could
absolutely.
say, Hugo.
And we have a really cool chat, and already have been chatting with our Patreons as well, getting some suggestions and talking and nerding out about special editions and art books and stuff like that. So which is cool.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, please go and support us at the Patreon at patreon.com/VFX Notes. In the meantime, this episode is about Better Man, one of the Oscar-nominated VFX films this year. Directed by Michael Gracey. We always start our podcasts with an assessment of the film, what we thought of it. I think I'm going to go first here, Hugo, because I'm not 100% sure what you think about this film. If people don't know, it's of course a biopic with a difference of the singer Robbie Williams, someone who was huge in Australia and huge in the UK.
Was
Not
he?
so huge in the US.
Oh, I didn't know he was huge in Australia. Okay.
Oh,
I
yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Big here. and we'll talk about this later, but not big in the US, and that's an interesting side of this movie. But the big difference with this film is that he is depicted in the film as a monkey, as an ape. And like that was kind of kept secret for a little bit, I think, until they could start promoting the film properly. And when people found out about that, they were like, what, why? What's that about? I think it ultimately ends up making the most interesting film this year. I'm not going to say it's the best because it has its issues, and again, we'll talk about those. But as a film that just blows you away with its crazy singing moments, the fact that Robbie Williams is depicted as a CG ape, chimpanzee, the fact that a lot of crazy magical realism things happen. There's drugs, sex, rock and roll, basically, in the film. There's lots of swearing, lots and lots of swearing. I just think it makes it interesting. We've seen some great biopics about Elton John and Freddie Mercury and all these other performers, and I think they've been fun too, often because the music is there to watch and listen to. This adds another level, and I just love that Michael Gracey went there with some of the scenes. So I had a rollicking good time watching the film. I always talk about my energy levels, my enjoyment in the cinema watching a film sometimes, rather than necessarily did I enjoy the themes.
Oh, so you went to the cinema to see this film?
Yes.
You went to the cinema?
Yep.
Okay.
This film has done tremendously well in Australia. So that's
I see. It did tremendously bad here. That's why
well, I think audiences really got into it, and mine did too.
Okay,
but
I see.
So I just had a really, really good time. I actually thought it was quite a very meaningful and reflective film, which is also one reason people are a bit turned off by it, because it seems very self-indulgent about Robbie Williams. But I had a great time. What about you, Hugo?
Yeah, so I didn't see it on the cinema because I think by the time I was aware of this film, it was gone already from the cinema.
Yeah.
So it was very short-lived in the cinema. Thankfully, I got a screener from the Visual Effects Society, so I could watch that. One thing I must say, which I was really disappointed, is the screeners from the Visual Effects Society are really compressed, so it's a bit unfortunate because the quality is not really good. So I only saw this kind of half-baked quality version. I saw it twice now. I only just recently saw it for the show because I was really not expecting this film to be nominated. I was not expecting it to be nominated just because, not because of the work. The work is outstanding. It's just because the film did so bad. It did so badly, and it was so poorly received that I wasn't really aware that it was even doing like an Oscar campaign. I wasn't even kind of like thinking that would be happening. What did I think about the film? That's a complicated question, Ian. Like, let me say this. Like, I don't really care much about Robbie Williams. I don't really, not that I like it or don't like it. I never really listened to him. I never really cared much about Robbie's music, never was into Take That. It was never a big thing in Portugal. It was never a big thing for me. So I, of course, know who Robbie Williams is. Of course, I think everyone in the UK knows who he is. He's like super famous just as a persona and as a British product almost, So I think that's fine. But I don't know. I think the film, I'm really split. The film is some of the super creative, like super gritty, super dark, bold movie, super bold, like in terms of the darkness and the surrealism and the way that they're depicting violence and depicting suicide. And the whole thing is like so creative and so well directed, beautifully done. The visual effects are stunning. But somehow I think it's a problem, a me problem, because I have no connection whatsoever with Robbie Williams. I'm not there. I'm like watching the movie and like, okay, fine. I just don't really get it in that sense. I was not very connected. I don't think, yes, it does look self-indulging, but I don't think that's I think that's him. He is like this, and so I understand that side, and I do see that he's struggling with depression, and he's struggling with drugs, and he's struggling with alcoholism. It's a very personal story, but I don't know. He's only 50. He's quite young. I found it a bit weird that this film exists, and if it wasn't him involved on the movie, maybe I would have thought differently of the movie, but I could never really go past the thing of, why is Robbie Williams doing this movie? Why is this happening? You know, it's just a bit strange, and it really brought me out of the movie, because I think the movie is, if it was about a musician, you know, imagine if the film was about a fictitious musician, like someone, like a drama about a struggling musician. I think it would have been, oh my God, the best movie of the year. But I don't know. I think every time Robbie Williams is doing his little voiceover and joking with the situation, and, you know, we're seeing a suicide attempt, and then he jokes after, and then we see the alcoholism, and he jokes, and all these little small jokes, and all these, it just doesn't land very well for me, and it just disattaches me from the movie, and it's a shame, because it's a really outstanding movie from a creative point of view. It has some stunning shots and really stunning acting, and the film is really well filmed and well edited. You know what I mean? It doesn't touch me. That's what I mean.
I can see your point of view.
Yeah.
Essentially, you're saying what I think a lot of audience members said about whether they want to see the film is Robbie famous enough to have a film about him like this being made? When you compare it to a Bob Dylan film, Complete Unknown, or as we said, the Freddie Mercury Queen film, or Elton John film, right? I kind of get it, except the thing is, he's so different from those other performers.
I know.
He's a smarty pants. He's cheeky.
I know.
So
it works.
He might only be young, 50, but he's had this roller coaster life that I think does
from a young
suit
age.
a biopic.
From a very young age.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When you say the film wasn't necessarily well received, I mean, it is like 88 or 90% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that. Like, I know what you mean.
But in terms of audience turnout, in America, I think in particular, the film really crashed and burned.
Yeah, it bombed big time. Yeah,
and the reason for that isn't rocket science. I think he acknowledges that he never necessarily made waves or inroads into the American recording market. Yeah. You know, and so it's like another example is, just pretend there's a huge country and western star in America, and there are many of them. They often don't make an import into the Australian music market. Yeah. So if someone made a biopic about them, I'd have no idea, and I probably wouldn't go. So it's like obvious why that happened, right?
But don't get me wrong. Like, nobody gets me. Please don't get me wrong on the comments and on the podcast. I think the film is really good, and I think the director did an astonishing job, and the actors did a great job. I just personally, as Hugo Guerra, I am not attached to Robbie Williams to a point to think, damn, I'm gonna see his biopic and I'm gonna have so much fun. I don't know his songs. I don't really listen to his music. And so it's like, okay, is this a song that is important? I don't know. I never listened to it. So it's a bit like, I am not the market for this movie, and I'm not the target audience for this movie, but I can really appreciate the movie because the movie is really good. And so I don't really want to sound negative, because I think the movie is not a bad movie at all. It's a really good movie, and it's something that I think I've never seen before. It's really creative. I've never seen anything like this, ever. Like, this is the most fresh thing of the last few years. It's super fresh. And I just feel that the Robbie Williams thing is the thing that I'm not connecting. And yes, he's a smartass, and it works for him, but I don't know, maybe if he would have done it when he was 70, maybe it would have worked better. I don't know. Maybe if he would have done it when he was older. Or I just feel that he still has so much to do in his life, and he's huge here in the UK. But you see, something must be this. I'm not the only one with this disconnect, because if you think about it, he's huge in the UK, and he did bomb in the UK as well. So it also didn't work for the UK audience for some reason. which is strange because, all the other biopics, Elton John's and all the other biopics did really well here. Like the Freddie Mercury one, Bohemian Rhapsody did $1 billion. It was like insane. So and the musics are there, and everyone knows the musics, and so I don't know what happened. I really don't know, and it's really fascinating because it's a super creative movie, super fresh, super artistic. The team did a fantastic job, but it just was not watched. But you know what? That's not a problem. I don't think the director should be upset with that. It might become a cult movie. It might become big later on. I just feel that there's something special here,
Well, curiously, and a nice segue to talk about Michael Gracey a little bit, is that Michael previously directed The Greatest Showman with Hugh Jackman and Zendaya.
Which I've never seen.
Right. Well, it's another musical. It's fantastic.
Which I love. You know I love musicals, so
everyone get ready for our Wicked episode. You are gonna freak out, everybody.
Oh, you mean the worst movie ever made? Yeah, that's fine.
No, Wicked is brilliant.
Sure.
The Greatest Showman was this film that I believe was released around December time. I'm not 100% sure on that. And had a very, very slow start.
I see.
Disappointingly slow start. And then, classic thing that sometimes happens with these sorts of movies, it was just really good. And so it had word of mouth.
Yeah.
And people went to see it. Kids loved it and could sing the songs, which were brilliantly done. And then there were sing-along versions of Greatest Showman. And then a lot of viral clips, a lot of clips went viral online, including rehearsal clips. And The Greatest Showman, it's a huge phenomenon. Like, it just made a lot of money eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And I think...
It took a while, I see.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily think Better Man will be the same thing at all, because it's not a feel-good movie that you see over Christmas. It's just not that movie. And but I think it might have another life on streaming and Blu-ray and DVD.
I actually think it will. And I'm the thing with this is that's why I was saying that people should definitely go and watch it. And I think they'll be surprised by how good it is. And I feel that this film really proves that it's a really creative movie, and it really shows really things that are in a different way. Hopefully it inspires other movies to do it this way as well. I really feel that it will definitely have a life of its own, because I think at some point people will realize that the film is actually good. And I'm like, oh, this is actually a good movie. Regardless if they like Robbie Williams or not, I think, I didn't care about Robbie Williams, but I still watched the movie and I still thought it was good. I still watched the whole thing and didn't really mind watching it. But imagine people that really like Robbie Williams' music, but they probably were on the fence maybe. And I think when they watch it, they will be very surprised and actually regretting it, not watching it before, I think. So, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, and also, I'm going to say to anyone who hasn't seen it yet but might be watching us, apart from all the sex and drugs and rock and roll stuff we've talked about and will talk about, Robbie Williams pulls no punches. He did not like his record label, some people in it, and some other people in his life. And they're like he takes no prisoners, or the director takes no prisoners in how that story is told.
Yeah.
He does a really great job of respecting his girlfriend / fiancé in the film. Which I think is really well done, and I think that's actually a standout of the film. That could have gone a different way, and is quite confronting. This is Nicole Apperton I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So that's really well handled. But I would encourage people to go and see the film for that side of it. You don't see that. I actually thought in some of the other biopics for Elton John and Queen, I felt like they pulled back a bit and didn't really show the nastier side of the industry.
Yeah.
So I was really impressed by that.
Maybe I should have said that when I was reviewing the movie. Like, I really don't like the other ones. I think the other films are not good movies. I think this is a much better movie because of that. You're absolutely right, because it's true. And when I saw the movie, I was like, no, this didn't happen. No, can't. Come on. And then I went to Wikipedia and read about it, and yeah, it did all happen. And it was like,
well, he had a crazy
shit.
life.
I know, but I didn't know. I had no idea. I had no idea. And you know what I mean? Because when you're watching the movie, the film is so surrealist that you're kind of like, maybe it's like a representation, or they're exaggerating or something, a take on it. But no, it's not a take. That's what happened. And which becomes really surprising. And it really affected me in a different way when I watched it the second time. Because I think it was different by reading that was all true, and then watching it the second time. I got more out of it the second time I watched it, for sure. You know, but I really want to watch it in a proper quality copy, really, because the one I have is not really very good. But it's not out yet, so it's not out on Blu-ray, so we can't still see it.
Well, just to return to Michael Gracey for a minute, Hugo. Again, if people don't know, he's an Australian director who has a visual effects background. He was basically a visual effects artist and supervisor. And I first knew about him from music video direction. And, you know, clearly he's pretty good at directing musicals. Music videos and commercials were clearly a good training ground. And then he kind of just burst onto the scene in The Greatest Showman, and now with Better Man, to really show his chops. Another thing that people might know is that he was meant to, or was going to direct, this Disney Snow White movie called The Order of the Seven, which I think was going to involve some pretty interesting digital human type characters. And that film didn't happen. We are getting a Snow White film this year. I'm not sure how similar it is or isn't. But, you know, the fact that he had that visual effects background meant that he was offered, I think, projects that would have a lot of CG and visual effects in them. He's a really nice guy. I've met him a couple of times, and he was good friends with the FX Guide and FX PhD team. And
he was at Animal Logic, wasn't he? He was an artist at Animal Logic for a while. And it's a fascinating career, actually, in terms of compositing and in terms of visual effects artists as well. And hey, Ian, but we are on a roll now here. Look at this. It's the first time we're getting a director that actually acknowledges the visual effects actually exists. So we had Fede, and then we went to Wes, and now we have Michael. I mean, this, hopefully it will continue forever. It will never end now.
Well, yeah, we've talked about that on a previous episode. I think the industry often goes in waves in terms of visual effects people getting into directing, and sometimes it works and doesn't work. I think we're in a phase at the moment where it's really working.
Brilliant. Three artists, and man, I cannot say enough good graces to Michael here, because every time he has a microphone in front of him, he's talking the good grease of Wes. He's talking good about Weta. He's constantly talking about Veta's team, and he constantly tells everyone always, couldn't done this movie without him. Couldn't done this movie without him. This movie did not exist without him. He's always crediting them, and it's insane. It's really good. It's really good to see, and I'm assuming, I've seen it on all the interviews. I've seen it on the behind the scenes. I'm assuming it's going to be all over the Blu-ray. I hope so. I hope he can push that over, and the Blu-ray has some cool stuff for us to see as well. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% sure how this film was funded, but sometimes watching the behind the scenes and talking to some of the visual effects team, I think in some ways it started out as an indie type project, you know, and WetaFX getting involved early and actually doing a whole bunch of previs for the film and tech viz that we'll talk about. I think that actually helped green light the film and made it something a bit bigger, you know. But yeah, that's another side of this film that's interesting. Like, it isn't necessarily a film that you would have got from, you know, like a classic big film studio in America. And it may well be getting distributed by one of these big film studios. I think it's Paramount and Roadshow. But like, it actually kind of feels like Michael could take a few risks because of that indie nature.
Yeah, most likely. The film, because the film feels like an indie production. The whole thing is handheld. It's like really dirty, and it's really like run and gun. The whole thing is like, it really very gritty, very noisy. It has a lot of grain. It's really dark as well. So it's it definitely does not look like your typical visual effects blockbuster movie.
Yeah.
And it's I think it's also very intimate, the style the DOP, Eric Wilson did as well on the film, especially the surrealism sequences, the crash and the falling of the stair sequences and the water sequences. Those are beautiful moments. Like, they're really, really inspired moments that were made, like with some advanced VFX going on there, which we'll talk in a minute. But it's really cool,
I love the cinematography in this film.
Yeah.
And it is the grittiness. It is the surreal nature of it. And we've sort of talked about magical realism. But the thing I love the most is like the no fear shooting.
Yeah.
Now, we know that WetaFX can handle putting a CG creature and making a digital scene in any kind of photography, right? They did that on every film they work on, basically, but the apes films.
Yeah.
But here, we're like up close with handheld cameras, with sunlight pouring in,
cameras
and with
moving
the CG
and rotating
chimp,
and
needing to be done. Like, there is a film that's already made when they shot the film and edited the film because of having a motion captured actor, and that comes across in the film. There's no limits by the fact that there's so much visual effects in the film. And as I say, we wouldn't get that with Weta, but sometimes you can feel it in some films.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. And hopefully, maybe if Michael is listening to this show, I hope he does, please convince whoever is going to distribute this to put the raw cut on the disc.
A raw cut.
Do that. I want to see the raw cut to this one, because this one is going to be very interesting, because this one won't have a lot of full CG shots. This will be much more like normal footage of a film, because it's not like Planet of the Apes where we have entire fight sequences, which are full CG. So I really wish we can see that. But
I agree with you. Compared to Planet of the Apes, absolutely. But there's actually probably a lot more CG environments in this film than people realize.
Yeah.
And not just the surreal, magical realism scenes. We're talking Regent Street and My Way sequence with Royal Albert Hall. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
It was so funny. The visual effects supervisor on the interview, he really summed up this entire production. He was like being an interview, and he was talking, and he was saying, usually when we do visual effects, we usually have a very controlled environment to do visual effects. And then he just says, this was not one of them. It was like, okay, dancing monkeys. Because that's the thing I think people really need to understand. Normally, these visual effects companies do fight sequences and they do action sequences. This is like a comedical dancing monkey. It's just so different, like it's so weird to do something like this. I can't imagine how much fun they had to actually pull this off. But it must have been very difficult, of course, as well.
Yes, the visual effects supervisor you're talking about is Luke Miller, who's a really cool guy. And so, of course, he's one of the nominees. Also, David Clayton, animation supervisor. Then there's Keith Herft, hope I pronounced that right, and Peter Stubbs. So, yes, I think part of the fun thing about this film is that because it's such a zany, crazy, satirical film, they can also have a little bit of fun with the visual effects promotion.
Absolutely.
One thing I'll even say right now, I just love one of Weta's behind the scenes videos showcasing different costume changes and hair designs for the apes. And of Robbie's ape character as he goes from kid to adult, right? And like it's a turntable. I'm sure you'll be playing this while we're chatting, Hugo. And then at one point he does like a eyebrow raise,
I know,
as Robbie Williams does, because it's also a range of movement test type reel.
It's so cool. It's
so funny. You can't do that in any other film, right? So yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I think the last time I saw something so funny was Guardians of the Galaxies with their like studio footage of the main characters. They're just walking around and dropping the cameras down, and
they get to be a little zany there.
Yeah, exactly. But
yeah.
I think also that film is quite zany as well. I think it makes sense. No, man, the props to Weta and also to the studio allowing this. The featurettes are really funny and really cool. We also got to see their premiere where all the VFX crew went to see the film, and we saw their reactions of watching the movie, and it was really cool. It was really cool to see them in front and center, because that's the team that made this happen. You know, it's really cool.
Yeah. Well, let's jump to talking about how the film was made, especially in relation to the visual effects work. And I mentioned earlier that WetaFX got on board very early. And I think partly that was because, okay, we know we can probably do an ape, but can we do dance scenes? Like dance, it just takes it up to a new level. And David Clayton was involved really early on, pre-vising and tech-vising these dance numbers, which, as I say, helped greenlight the film. And I think, look, we always say it here, Hugo, when the visual effects studio is allowed to be part of production from the beginning, very much happens a lot on these big films these days, but when they're allowed to be super involved like that, it is vital and aids in every step of the process down the line. Clearly it helped here by being involved in previs.
Yeah, absolutely. This one would not have been done without that section, without that, because this is such a complex movie. You're talking about like almost 2,000 shots. Like as they said, it's 1,968 shots, like, which is a lot of shots.
Yeah.
And which is like, it's like a Marvel movie almost, like it's a typical action movie. And then you have also not just the really complex shots of just having all this CG, but it's pivotal to have a lot of previs, because all these transition shots where they transition from going up the camera, or the camera goes down, or even, we have that on the funeral where we are inside a room and then the camera dollies up and then they're actually in the grounds of the cemetery. And there's all these really beautiful transitions from shot to shot that require a bit of motion control and require organization. I think my favorite one, which I saw a really detailed breakdown on the Visual Effects Society submission, is the dance scene on the studio with the mirrors, and those shots, it's really detailed how they've broke. I hope it becomes public at some point, but it really is nice to see all the small little clips and patches that they had to do to build that shot. And you really need a lot of organization with previs, because you're moving mirrors, your camera is moving, then you rotate. You're basically faking reflections and actually doing the reflections in physical mode, not CG. And then you have compositing to rotoscope and to cut the sections so that you can merge in between the shots. There's quite a lot of moments on the film where time passes and you have these transitions. It is just impossible to do it without some proper previs,
I was just thinking about that too, that if it was just a film with a stand-in actor for Robbie Williams, or even Robbie Williams himself.
Yeah, at part of the film when he was aged, I guess. So he could have been, or they could have de-aged him or something. They could have done that as well.
But you couldn't really do those fun transitions with a very normal kind of biopic, I think. It's the fact that we have this ape in the film that gives you a bit of stylization, right? There's already the crazy camera moves that are part of the film, but the stylized version of Robbie Williams' life lets you do these transitions and enables you to get those passages of time. And that's hard to do. Except with that.
And those
device.
Transitions really must harken back to the times of a director of music videos, because it's such a music video type of thing. When you have the stage that goes on to the back and then another stage comes in and then the camera moves to the left and there's something else there, and then it moves to the right and there's something else there. Almost coming back to these like old Jamiroquai music videos, or it's all these kind of really smart camera kind of nerdy kind of thing that they used to do in the 90s and 2000s. And the film is filled with those things. And that's why I was mentioning in the beginning that it's such a creative movie, and that's why people should go and see it, regardless if they like Robbie Williams or not. They should really give it a go and give it a chance, because of those creative moments. They're really inspired.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to comment on something you just mentioned about the stylization of those movements and the cameras and everything. There's another thing that really is extraordinary on the film in terms of stylization. When you look at, especially the younger Robbie Williams, the younger ape, the child one and the teenager one, it's funny how Weta and their team managed to make a photoreal chimp, but he's not photoreal. It's like a mixture between an animated character and a real shaded. It's like it's an animation from Pixar, but with complete photoreal shading. But it's so well controlled, and the balance is so good because it never goes too much to animation, but it never goes too much to realism. So you have this thing in the middle where you have a very stylized Robbie Williams, and you notice his expressions in the monkey. You see him there.
Yeah.
But it's so stylized.
But it
so
doesn't
stylized.
it doesn't necessarily look, and deliberately so, like Robbie Williams.
But it's awesome. It's so cool.
Except his expressions often are.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's and you're basically talking about the uncanny valley there, Hugo.
Yeah.
Which is not, we usually talk about that in terms of digital humans.
Yeah.
But we often also mention it in terms of digital characters that don't look right. But
that's not what I'm saying. This looks right. This looks perfect.
I agree. No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
WetaFX threaded the needle kind of perfectly here.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look too goofy.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It doesn't look too photoreal that we're just watching another Planet of the Apes.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's why it's so cool that it's nominated next to Planet of the Apes, because it's so different. Yeah. It's so different from Planet of the Apes. It is. I thought that was an achievement to make something so stylized, but still make it. I love stylized. I love stylized visual effects, and I miss it. I really miss it. So.
On that note, here's something I have to admit to you. I watched the film, and then I didn't really know how Weta did it, as in didn't know much about the background of it. Started asking Luke and the team about the motion capture, thinking that possibly Robbie Williams had maybe not necessarily acted in all the scenes, because, it's quite crazy dance moves and other stuff happening.
And he's a bit older.
But maybe had done some performance capture at Weta's mocap studio or on set. I mean, he certainly was in Melbourne, which is where they shot this.
Yeah.
But no, that's not how they did it. And in fact, it probably would have been the wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
Because it would have been too much trying to capture the likeness of Robbie. Now, they totally scanned Robbie and have, as we keep saying, have put in his mannerisms in there. But instead, they had this fantastic actor, Jono Davies, do all the motion capture for the film on set in one of Weta's, active capture marker suits and HMCs. And somehow Jono has got his own style, but also captured Robbie's mannerisms and the energy that Robbie Williams had in the 90s, essentially, and 2000s. This is what people in England and Australia remember about Robbie. He just seemed to have a lot of energy. I mean, it was probably drugs. But he was and he was boasty. And like one time he got a big record deal and basically said, "I'm going to be really rich," or something like that, but just said it with so much gusto.
Oh, yeah.
I remember this press conference.
Like he says on the beginning of the movie, I had a lot of balls, but I can't catch any balls. It's just so funny. No, you really nailed it now. That's the thing. That the acting of that actor, sorry, what's his name? It's
Johnny Davies.
Johnny Davies. The cool thing about his acting is that it's a representation of Robbie Williams, and that's why it's so good, because he's not overdoing it. He's not like doing a method actor Robbie Williams, but he's also not being too goofy. He's making almost like a theatrical representation of like a caricature. He's making like a stylized version of what Robbie would have been. And I saw in the behind the scenes, Robbie was often a lot of times on set, and he was like consulting with him and talking with him, and he was so happy with his performance. He was so happy. He was so thrilled by the way he basically just made his own version of Robbie Williams. And I think that's the fresh part of this movie, is how the director Michael allowed that to happen, making it his own thing. And I'm sure the actor is thrilled, because then he had the freedom to do something much more interesting than just doing like a method actor version of Robbie Williams, like often it is. When you look at like at the Queen movie or Elton John, they're all like, especially Freddie Mercury is like almost looks like Freddie Mercury. He's like making himself look like Freddie Mercury. So this is much more interesting. I really found it much more interesting.
There are other actors involved, and that's for the younger version of Robbie Williams. And I'm actually going to say, I actually think Weta completely nailed, and the performance as well. Like it's a large section of the movie where we see Robbie Williams as a kid or a teenager.
It's like almost 20 minutes. It's quite.
I actually think that is some of the best character animation we've seen from Weta in some time.
It's very good.
And it's a bit more subtle than the craziest things that follow with Take That and Robbie Williams as a solo artist. And it's just very beautifully done. And, there's the innocent side of it.
Oh, man, especially the theater play when he's playing as a pirate. That's such a beautiful and inspired moment of animation. The little subtleties of him with the sword and looking at and making jokes and being goofy. It's really, really good. It's I know what you mean. It's really, really good.
But your mind starts to boggle, or mine does, when I think about, okay, so they had to create Robbie as a kid, teenager, multiple versions of him as an adult. Like, in the end, I think, Hugo, they made like 226 different costumes. And 50 hairstyles. And then, like, that's just huge already for the texturing, cloth of, CFX, modeling, build team at Weta. Then we've got things like matching Robbie Williams' eyes and brows and even his tattoos. Robbie Williams has very distinctive tattoos. And I think Weta had to think about, well, how are we going to do that? Do we just put them on top of his hair, or is it part of his skin and you see it through the hair groomed? They really did that well. You don't see them all the time because he's wearing clothes. But I actually, if people were super fans of Robbie Williams, they're going to know about all the tattoos that he has. And it's on the ape. So.
Well, the cool thing about that as well, it's a really good decision of making it groom instead of ink, of making it like it's like actually fur, because it wouldn't really work as an ink thing. It would have looked like, how do they say it? It would have looked like he went to the vet. They would have that's how they say it on the behind the scenes. Like, oh, they just like took a little piece so they could make a marking. It would have looked really weird. And also, like, think about how deep they have to go, because probably Robbie doesn't even remember himself exactly which tattoo he did at what time. There's so many, 28. So you had to go and backtrack so that it would be correct for the age that he would be at that time. So this is a major component of the movie, and it's really complicated because you have to like research, you have to check all the photos, then you have to come up with this thing with the fur directly into the skin, and then on top of that you have like you said, the 49 types of grooms, which matched all the hairstyles with mohawks, with buzz cuts, with curly hair. I love the curly hair. It's so 90s. It's so cool. And so you have all those hair types, which then have to have the tattoos as well. So they have to put the ink, like when he's blonde, for example, the tattoos still need to work. This is really complicated. This is really complicated.
I have some stats from WetaFX. They gave me some stats. So you ready for this, Hugo?
Yeah, let's go.
Robbie's digital ape model features 1,356,1 167 strands of fur, right? With 225,712 of those strands being shaved to replicate his tattoos. So,
God.
golly gosh, that is
Jesus
impressive
Christ.
work. Yeah.
It is. And the hair thing as well, like not only the tattoos making it complicated, but also how do you make the monkey not look like he has a wig? Because the thing with this is that the monkey, there's no hairline. It's just one single thing. And so the mohawk or the curlies or whatever he's having at that time, it has to go all the way to the rest of the body. And it has to merge completely to his, neck area and all the back. And as you notice, he's always naked on the movie. He's always taking his shirt off. So you always like have the whole, most of the time he's only with pants. Like he's always like, I noticed on the performances, any chance he has, he takes the shirt off, which is funny. But this is really complex. And that was my surprise when I was on the judging panel of the Visual Effects Society and I started watching these behind the scenes and these breakdowns. I didn't even thought of this shit. I was like watching these breakdowns. I was like, oh yeah, right. They have like 49 hairstyles and he has like 200 costumes. And it's like, I didn't even thought about that because you're watching the movie and you, at some moment you forget and you just think he's Robbie Williams and you often never really even consider that he's an ape.
It adds to the absolute, not realism, but I'd say naturalism of relating to the character, which we do, I think, when he really is with Nicole Appleton. We really feel for him, I think, at those points. And
exactly.
For her. And the fact that, yes, the next day in their lives, he's in a different costume. So they've got to deal with that.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And that's why when I first heard that this film was on the 10 list for the Oscars, I really everyone forgive me. I was like so dismissive. I was like, oh, why? Oh, it's just like, but then when I started really thinking through how much work this is, I then started realizing, shit, this is like probably one of the most complex things. 258 costumes, which is a lot already by itself. But then they had to go and research all of the real ones. And some of them they sourced, some of them they rented, some of them they bought.
Yeah, they actually existed. Yeah.
They existed.
For the film, I mean.
Yeah, and they scanned them all and got all the material. So the costume designers were amazing on that and got all that material. But it doesn't really work, does it? Because it has to be for ape proportions. So then they have to redo them all again. And they have to make them work with an ape, which has longer arms and broader shoulders and smaller pelvis. And the whole thing is just a completely different rearrangement of all those 258 costumes. Yeah. So it becomes really, it's almost like when you're watching a CG movie and you hear about this, we had 500 soldiers and we had 300 types of clothing. This is what this is. Like, we had 300 types of clothing, but it's one guy, just one dude.
Well, yeah. I want to pick up on something you just said about when the film got into the Bake Off list. And it's like, oh, so is Planet of the Apes. And then now they're both nominated, right?
Yeah,
and they're huge character
versus Weta.
Yeah.
It's just like
well, they're big character shows. And that is something that fascinates me a little bit. Like, apes, well, we've now done 4 films. We know how to do it. And you could even say the same thing here, right? We know how to make an ape. But because of all the things we've talked about, Weta still had to do something slightly different. They shot the motion capture. They had witness cameras, which is what they have. They have a way of translating that motion capture into their system via motion editing, via a deep learning solver that they've developed on previous films. And then, as we always say, there's a huge keyframe animation side to it. And I just want to make sure we don't sort of dismiss that.
No, I know.
And I'm not trying to.
No.
As like, oh, Weta knows how to do it. It's easy. No way. The artistry is like per shot and probably stepped up an even bigger level here because they're never classic talking over the shoulder, like normal shots. They're dynamic cameras, moving cameras. Robbie's saying something crazy. Robbie swears a lot. There's another stat here. I'm sure. I'm sure I have another stat here about swearing. Oh no, I can't find it. But anyway,
he swears a lot.
He swears a lot. He swears a lot. So that's like a new challenge, is what I'm saying to WetaFX's animators.
It's funny that you're saying that because you're right. Like, that's, people don't really realize this, but this film is very different from all the other movies. It's a very different type of project, and they're tackling things that are not often tackled. You know, dancing, sweating, and they're vomiting, and he's like committing suicide, and he's doing all sorts of things that you never usually see on a film. You know, like you don't usually get to see, you know, these kind of moments. And so, and especially the dancing and the singing, especially the lip sync and the dancing is really complicated because, so I really understand why it was nominated, because it is different and it's special and it's something that we don't often see. As I mentioned in the beginning, I've never seen a movie like this. I'm sure everyone on the Academy was feeling the same. I was like, shit, like I never see anything like that. Here's my vote. I think it has to be like that. But obviously, there's a lot of crossover with the pipelines, of course. And we can maybe talk a little bit about that, about how this was captured on set, actually, and how that was done. You already mentioned a little bit that there's a lot of manual animation. But there's also, of course, the typical camera rig that is attached to the actors, which is capturing with a dual camera as well. And which is a similar setup to what Weta created with the Planet of the Apes. But not really, because I noticed, especially on the behind the scenes, that there's a lot of intimacy in this movie, and so there's a lot of moments where the camera couldn't be there. The camera couldn't be attached on the heads, you know, so they had to do it by hand, really, and with witness cameras.
That's particularly for facial capture, and don't forget also there's concert scenes where Robbie's character is holding a microphone, and if there's a stereo pair camera shooting back at the face, that's all going to get in the way of that. So they absolutely didn't always rely on an HMC for the facial animation. And I'm always curious about that. Like, if the facial animation is facial motion capture is vital, how does like Weta deal with it when they don't have the camera? Well, they've got the DLS, which is the deep learning solver. They've got the experience of the artists knowing what a particular move will look like when it's captured or not captured. And also, let's go back to basics. They've also done a fax capture of Robbie and probably of Jono, and that's a way of seeing what faces look like under those different preset fax shapes.
And never underestimate the power of witness cameras as well. Like, witness cameras are perfect, or they actually, you can, these days, you know, it was more complicated back then, back in the day, but now these days, witness cameras can be really tiny. You can get really micro Blackmagic little cameras, GoPros. You can get whatever on set, and it's not even visible when you put them on set. So I don't know which ones they use, but I'm assuming, because I've done that in the past with witness cameras, and it's exactly what the animators need. If you get like 2 or 3 angles of an expression shot by witness camera, man, an animator is gonna grab that and gonna make it. You know, that's fine as long as they have the coverage. And so, obviously, it's a manual process. It's a lot of labor intense process, but it's really worth it, because then they can. That's where you bring this expertise and that creativity from those animators, but because then they bring in. They pick up the performance from the actor and make it even more special and even more, you know, like stylized, and even more Robbie Williams, which is really nice to see in this film, you know.
Let's turn, Hugo, to some of the specific big dance sequences. There's actually about 7 or 8. I think we can't talk about all of them. The standout one is Rock DJ. Yeah. Big song. It's actually used in the film to show Take That getting a record deal and then spilling out onto Regent Street in London, and also showing the passage of time as you know, they've become more successful, and Robbie becomes more successful. But like, I could just tell you that they spill out and dance onto Regent Street. That doesn't really indicate the craziness of this sequence where they jump onto double-decker buses. I think they're on pogo sticks. They're up and down. There's a giant gumball machine. They go into the shops of Regent Street. If anyone knows Regent Street, it's that sort of curved roadway with lots of high street kind of shopping shops, basically. They come back out again, and it's kind of a one-er. I think it actually lasts 5,334 frames. 3 minutes and 42 seconds. So this is an insane sequence for any feature film, Hugo.
Yeah.
And then it's just one of the big dance numbers in Better Man.
But this is by far the most complicated one, by far. Like, this is really complex stuff. You're talking about merging. It's every compositor's and tracking artist's nightmare, this thing, because this is
nightmare or delight.
Yes. Well, I'm sure that when they found out they're going to do it, it's a delight, and while they are doing it, it's a nightmare. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You're talking about 36 plates and multiple takes, multiple locations, some of them on Regent Street, some of them in Melbourne, stitching interiors with exteriors and match moving all as one continuous shot. And it goes quite crazy at some moment, like when he goes to the bus and then he jumps and goes out, and then the camera comes out of it. It becomes really fast-paced as well. So this entire thing is really complex. And it's really cool that we have a breakdown as well, because breakdown that has been released, there are two of them, of course. The one that was released on YouTube on Veta's channel is outstanding. It really showcases really well all the layers and all the things that they had to do. But then, of course, there's the visual effects submission breakdown as well, which is really detailed about how this was made as well, which hopefully it comes out at some point. I hope so, because I think people would love to know a bit more how this was actually achieved.
Yeah. Yes, and there are something like 500 dancers in this sequence and a couple of different digital costume changes, which are part of the transitions that you were mentioning before. And as we say, it sort of cuts between things shot in Melbourne and then things shot in Regent Street, which, by the way, they did shoot like in this, time allotted that they had on Regent Street, likely something like midnight to 6 a.m. I heard a podcast with Michael Gracey discussing this sequence where he said the craziest bit of this was that they rehearsed it, somewhere else, taped out as a Regent Street somewhere. They had all the dancers, there, and then like maybe a week before or sometime really close to shooting, the Queen died.
Oh.
And I think that meant that they couldn't shoot it because the City of London or City of Westminster or whatever it is just didn't want that kind of celebration while you guys were in 10 days of mourning for the Queen's death. But what it meant was, and maybe this is also related to the strikes, but I can't remember that exactly, they actually couldn't shoot what they'd rehearsed for another 5 months.
Jesus.
So I think some people said, well, we're just going to cut the sequence, right? Or we're going to do it a different way. And I think it's this says something about Michael Gracey's character, that he wanted this in the film, that this meant something, right? It's you can feel the jovialness, you can feel the glee on the performers' faces and Robbie's character's face. And it was so important that this be part of the film that, of course, they did come back and shoot elements of it at Regent Street.
Well, this sequence is the sequence, isn't it? It's the money sequence. I mean, it is the sequence that they're promoting. It's the sequence they show every time. It's the sequence that everyone knows about. Even people doesn't know about the film or haven't watched the movie, they've seen the sequence.
Yes.
It's actually, the entire sequence has actually been published on Robbie Williams' YouTube channel as well. Because if anyone can put that music in this entirely without being copyright strike. So the whole thing is there. No, man, from a creative point of view, this is an outstanding shot. And now you're telling me that story about maybe it wasn't even going to be making the cut.
Yeah.
That's even more starting. That makes me sad if we didn't even saw this before. But I just wanted, there's a couple of things that I wanted to just mention just to showcase, and apologies if I'm going to get a bit nerdy, but just to showcase how complicated this thing was.
Yeah.
Because you have, like you said, limited time allotment to be on this place. And then, of course, you made a full LiDAR scan of this entire place, which is already complicated as well. Again, time limits, you have to be quick. You have to make this LiDAR scan, and it has to be physically accurate to match the other rehearsal place that they were. Then from the LiDAR scan, they use it as a base to kind of transition from the exteriors to the interiors, because then when you transition to the interior, you have to have the section you film, which is, of course, shot apart, months apart, or even weeks apart. And so you're shooting, I don't believe it was motion control, so you're basically shooting handheld going into a shop, which is then Melbourne. And so you have to project the footage that you shot in Melbourne into the geometry of the LiDAR scan as it goes into the shop. And somehow, as you go in, you then have to rotoscope all the people that are walking into the shop, and then you have to rotoscope everyone outside. And then, of course, the cameras are different speeds, and so you have to rotoscope all the elements, and then you have to retime all the little different elements so they match up with the turn to the shop, and then you have to rebuild that entire thing with those sections that have been retimed. And this is just to do the transition. Then you have the monkey in the middle of all of this, which is a CG
and then
monkey.
Reflections. I mean, that's a big part of shot front as well, right?
Yeah, and,
So,
and also,
God.
let's not forget about on the background, there are CG buildings, and there are storefronts in CG, and there's CG crowd, and there's CG traffic, and there's in the background, just in the background. So that's just another layer of whatever that has to be there. This is so complicated that you're gonna take your hairs out while trying to paint and composite this thing. Well done to the compositing team and the lighting and rendering and simulation team that did this. And then there's another thing I wanted to mention. You know how things sometimes get caught up with physically accuracy? I love how they don't do that on this movie. This movie, freely sometimes goes a bit berserk and goes a bit nuts, and it goes a bit... And, of course, there's a lot of moments on this sequence that do that, but I think the most cool of them all is the gumball, the big gumball jar, which has the 85,000 gumballs coming out. Because if you did a simulation of this, the balls would just drop and then just roll down the street. That's it. They would just do that. Physically, that would be what would happen, because the street, I live in London, the street goes downwards, and so all the balls would go to the Piccadilly Circus. That's it. But these balls, they stay there, they move around the dancers, and then the dancers roll with them, and then sometimes the balls jump or bounce a bit more than they would, and they just stick around the performance. It's almost like they've made a really photoreal simulation, but if you really think about it, it's completely wrong, but it's so correct as well at the same time. It is really cool. This is so art-directed, and all the little balls are just handcrafted and art-directed in a way that you don't even think about it. Because then you also have the problem of you have to match move all the CG, all the dancers that are there. You have to do match moving to them, so you have to do collider geometry, because then the balls have to bounce on the bodies of them, but the balls are CG, and so you have to have colliders, and then you have... This is just another level of complexity, but it's so well handled because it's just another creative touch on the shot that could work so badly, but it works so well, and it's not physically accurate, but it's just cool. That's what I love about that. Little thing,
Yeah. Oh, there's tons of little things like that. I mean, think about it also. We're talking about the 90s here. So they've actually also made Regent Street appear period correct.
Exactly.
And that includes what you see at Piccadilly Circus, but also facades of buildings. I mean, it goes by pretty quick, and the camera's roaming and rotating. So you kind of, well, it's on YouTube. You can pause it and look at it. I certainly have watched it a couple of times.
The breakdown only goes to half of it, but the entire sequence is on Robbie Williams' YouTube channel. So you can watch the whole thing there. It's really cool that it's actually available in public for everyone to watch,
Yeah. Let's talk about another sequence, which I think is really cool and actually kind of huge in the film, which is the song that plays while this is happening is Let Me Entertain You. And it's basically this huge concert at Knebworth Park or Knebworth Festival that's very famous for the way it was sold out and how many people went there over 4 days. I think in the film they play it as if it happens just in one day.
Yeah.
But this is a sequence where they actually went and shot a real concert in Serbia. Now, I believe they went to Serbia because they could actually find a location to shoot and get more than 2,000 people as extras to come along and be there. It's kind of harder and possibly more expensive to do that in the UK or even in Australia, where much of the film was filmed. So they went and shot a concert in Serbia with 2,000 extras, and they've effectively then increased the extras with digital crowd to 108,000 for the Knebworth Park thing. I mean, that's cool. The camera is also often doing like turning upside down, rotating things, and Robbie's there singing. So there's crazy stuff happening. It's not just a sort of a typical normal concert. But I really like these scenes, Hugo. I feel like they might have even used some real footage of the actual concert.
No, yeah, they did. They talk about that on the Visual Effects Society nomination submission video. They actually intercut with some archival footage and they comp in certain parts of it, and of course what's on screen as well is archived. So there's quite a lot of little nuance Easter eggs of the real concert there. It's a complete reconstruction from historical pictures and also lighter scans and also replica using Google Maps as well. So it's supposedly, I didn't saw the concert, I wasn't there, but it's supposedly very, very, well constructed and for the people that've been on the concert think it's really similar and really the same. Yeah. And I think it's really remarkable how by that time you don't even think about those things. Like, you're just watching the performance and he's singing, and I only really even started noticing of all that entire CG when I saw the breakdowns and the nominations, because I didn't even thought about that at the time, because it looks so real and it looks so realistic,
Yeah. Apart from great crowd simulation, what you kind of notice only from the breakdowns, but I didn't notice it when I was watching the film, is great. What I think they referred to the article I wrote on Befores and Afters as concert detritus. And by that they mean bouncy balls, like maybe some flags, people holding cameras, things being thrown up in the air. And of course there are things that happen at concerts and football games too that, people have to add in as digital crowd. That is almost invisible effects work. I thought that was super cool.
Yeah.
One thing I want to mention too is that it turns out that they needed some digi-doubles for that scene, obviously, and for many other scenes. And they would often go and scan the extras when they could, as they do on these films. But they needed more. And so they actually got Luke Miller, the Weta visual effects supervisor, to be scanned, do some motion capture. Sometimes Dave Clayton, the animation supervisor, did some motion capture. And it turns out Luke Miller is in the film 767 times as a digital extra.
Oh my God.
Which is really funny, and I think is like kind of a fun thing, especially,
What the hell? Like, really?
And it means he's in like different costumes and different positions and obviously not recognizable. But I think that's cool.
Back in the day, we would back in the day, I would just put some birds and some ceiling on the shots. He's not putting himself on the shots. That's such a cool little thing. I didn't know that.
Well, here's a fun anecdote as well that I may have talked about on another VFX Oscar nominee podcast. So, okay, Luke Miller, the production visual effects supervisor, is in the film.
Really?
Yeah. So that's the guy who's the extra 767 times.
Yeah.
In Wicked, Jonathan Faulkner from Framestore
is
in Wicked. He plays and we'll talk about it in the podcast for Wicked. He plays a projection of the wizard. Okay, so that's 2 films where the visual effects supervisor is in the film.
So this is not new, right? Like our buddy Steven Soretti is also on Eternals as well, with the green screen suit and everything.
That's true.
It's one of the funniest cameos that I've seen.
Yeah. He may well be in another film by the same director, James Gunn.
You think he's going to be in Superman? You think he's going to be in Superman?
No, previously. But here's the thing. Twisters, which was in the Bake Off list, but didn't come into the final 5, it also has a cameo from the production visual effects supervisor, Ben Snow, who's an Australian supervisor, and he gets out of a van in that film and says some Australianism comment. I can't remember what it is, you little beauty or something. He's really good. But I thought that was really interesting that the film's vying for an Oscar this year for visual effects. The visual effects supervisor really makes an appearance in a bunch of them.
They're doing an Alfred Hitchcock thing, like they're just all appearing on the movie. Yes. Let's keep that going, guys. Let's go. Let's do this on every single movie. We want to okay, so whoever is listening, please make a supercut on YouTube with all the supervisors all together. Let's join all the VFX supervisors that have been on movies since the beginning of time. I'm sure we'll gather probably quite a few. You already mentioned 5. So, Twisters, man. That's right, Twisters. That's right. We're going to do an episode about that, which will be on Patreon. It's going to be a special exclusive episode about Twisters. Just to remind the audience now. And I can't wait to do that one because that was a fun movie to watch.
That was a good movie. Yeah.
Okay.
And then back to Knebworth Park, Hugo. What about that crazy fight where he's just fighting himself, like hundreds of versions of himself? It's insane, right?
I know. This thing, all hell breaks loose. It's funny because he's now fighting every single ape we've seen in the movie at the same time. While this is happening, this camera move is like going, but it's the first time the film has a camera move that it looks like these 2001 action movies, like the camera is like rotating around and going crazy, and which really fits in really well. While this is all happening, there's this massive time lapse happening on the background where you see the stages being constructed, deconstruction. I'm assuming it's just representing like the stages of all the concerts and all the things that he's going through. This is some crazy stuff. There's like swords, there's like axes, there's like fights, there's like knives. Man, I was not expecting that sequence to happen on the film.
I'm going to be honest with you. I actually found that bit hard to watch. I found it a bit confronting compared to even the crazy drug stuff in the film.
Yeah.
And I reckon I did a bit of this during that, Hugo. You know, I'm known for doing that in some horror films. What's amazing about this sequence is that it ends with something super gritty, as if it's something out of a Stanley Kubrick version of 2001. As if he shot some sort of amazing fight sequence. It is beautiful, poetic, and just part of that stylized nature of where the film goes.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, it's so sad as well because at the middle of all this fight, which keeps going and keeps going, and then he just stabs the child at the very end, and all the sound just goes down and it just becomes silence, and it's really powerful. And then, of course, you have the suicide attempt right after that, and then once again, cinematography is really outstanding because you have this entire warmth, reds, and really gory and bloody, and then you cut to this blue, cold world of him committing suicide with the ice place.
Attempting suicide.
Attempting, sorry. Attempting to suicide with this cold, really cold ambience with the ice and everything. And then, of course, the sun hitting the trees, giving a bit of hope. This is a really poetic sequence and really a beautiful sequence. Absolutely. Like it's so crazy if you start thinking about it, because it starts with him hanging on the concert. He does the whole concert, then they have a fighty sequence, and then he ends with this tragic suicide attempt. It's a roller coaster of a sequence. It's all of a span of 5 minutes or something. Yeah. It's really, really intense. Super intense, yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, Hugo? There's a bunch of stylized sequences in the film we've mentioned here and there. One of them is that car he's driving and eventually going into the water. But before it gets there, it goes through all these different lighting conditions representing, his state of mind and the danger he's feeling. And very nicely done, backed up by great visuals and simulations and effects by WetaFX.
Yeah, that sequence is really beautiful, and I love the red when he goes to the red, and then you have the lights of all the buses and the trucks, and you're right, like the simulation, the water, the rain, the smoke, the whole thing is just, even the little details of the water going through the windshield, like this gritty. It has a name. It's called rivulets. Just going through the
rivulets.
It's really beautiful, and it has this end, which is also astonishing. Underwater, where you then see you have the suicidal fans going after him, and then you have the reporters going after him. That sequence is like a Salvador Dali's dream sequence. It's like, it reminds me of there's this amazing film from Alfred Hitchcock which has an entire sequence directed by Salvador Dali. It kind of reminds me of that. It's such a off the wall dreamy sequence as well. The film is filled with those things. It's really cool.
Yeah.
And once again, we're not going to go through every single thing, because we don't want this podcast to be hours, but once again, the visual effects of Weta really, really brought those sequences up to life, because, of course, this is all very stylized. Yes, it's all very, very symbolic, but yeah, they brought in all the guns. They used Loki for the simulations, they used Houdini, they brought in all this physically accurate pipeline, of absolute physically accurate of the ice, of the water, of the bubbles, of all of this, and it just made the sequence photoreal, completely photoreal, and it makes it even more unnerving because it's so photoreal. You're like watching this thing in front of you, which is not existing. It's impossible. It's an impossible sequence. But it's so photoreal that your mind is like fighting what is happening. It's really unnerving. It's really cool.
One brief mention of another sequence is She's the One, where he essentially meets Nicole Appleton on a cruise ship, a small boat, a fancy boat, and they have a dance sequence. And look, it's probably not as crazy as Rock DJ or Regent Street or Knebworth Park, but you've got to remember here that it's a dance number with completely close interaction between two characters, a live action actress and, of course, Jono dancing, but with Jono replaced by an ape.
Yeah.
And I think that just, of course, Weta can handle interactive stuff like that, but it's beautifully done, very elegant, again heavily prevised, so that they could work out camera moves. But I really love this sequence, but just want to only mention how good the close interaction is for that one.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I don't want to spoil your very, very serious, beautiful scene that you love, but my favorite part of all of that is when I see the breakdown. You see she's dancing with like a dude dressed with a green screen suit, with a blue screen suit.
That's
in
true.
certain moments,
That's
because
true.
sometimes it's the stuntman that is doing it. And it's such a funny sequence of she's
actually,
dancing.
you're probably right. It probably is mostly a dance performer.
Well,
Yeah.
different parts. Like some parts are them real, but then when it switches to the stuntman, you see another person with the blue screen, the blue suit, and then I think I'm not sure if it's her. It probably isn't her. Like I'm not assuming. There's no breakdowns yet, but I'm assuming they wouldn't be able to pull off some of those moves. You know, they're quite complex, and the entire shot as well. The entire sequence is pretty much like a blue screen 360 stage, because you have the boat, but then you have large blue screen canopies on the side, and so there's a huge amount of compositing happening there to do that.
I mean, this is the kind of sequence, Hugo, that sometimes I feel we could do a whole episode on, even though it doesn't seem as complex as the other ones. You've got the previs, the tech viz, the environments, the CG character animation, the virtual cinematography. Sometimes, and you'll see it slightly in the breakdown, they've had to replace Nicole Appleton's actress's arm with a CG one, right? Yep. They have to make sure her hands go through Robbie Williams' hair/fur.
Yeah.
Now, that's huge work, meticulous compositing work, and also amazing animation. I think it's almost one of those things that is invisible and seamless because we're already taken by the huge other accomplishments in the film. But I kind of love that, and I just know how much work goes into that from the WetaFX crew. So I wanted to shout out to it.
Well, you know, like just talking about compositing itself, like you just mentioned, which is like that is really in the realm of roto and paint, but the entire movie, the whole movie, every shot on the movie comes from this really high detail compositing methodology. They have, as usual, from all the films we've been covering lately, and especially Weta has been doing a fantastic job trying to match these things. You're talking about reconstructing complete flares on camera. You're reconstructing vignetting. You're reconstructing bokeh, reconstructing distortion, applying local imperfections, basically simulating lenses and light. The whole thing is really well achieved in all the shots, and it's completely seamless. And of course, I'm sure I know Weta's been building this up. We see it on every film. They're getting even better and better. We saw it on The Batman, where they were constructing all these flares, and then we saw it on Planet of the Apes, and they're constructing all these flares, and now they're doing it here. I'm assuming they already have a fantastic, great library of flares and lenses and types of lenses that they use and types of cameras. It's just growing and becoming not easier, but becoming more and more complex and completed, in that sense. But there's two things in the compositing pipeline that I have noted here that I really wanted to say, because it's my two favorite things I saw of all the breakdowns, and I don't think is even that noticeable because I didn't hear anyone talking about it, and it's quite quick. One of them is the methodology they use to make sure their CG and lighting rendering was matching, which is smart. They have this amazing thing of making a skin shader for the ape, which is a Caucasian light skin shader, which matches the same skin as the actor. And so on every shot, they rendered out this new version with the completely normal Caucasian skin matching the normal actor, just to validate the composite, just to validate the lighting. And then once it's done, then let's move on and put the fur and put the real melanin and put all the skin and put the rest of the monkey there. This is so cool. This is so cool. I when I saw this, I was like, shit, this is so smart. I felt so stupid. I was like, damn, like who remembered doing this? This is really a nice idea. And I was like just feeling, I'm going to steal that.
And I remember seeing in a VES breakdown that the result of that is a really cool side-by-side, which we will probably not be able to show here.
I know.
Of like the effect of that is a side by side of Jono Davies in the HMC and mocap helmet and gear, but also an ape in motion capture helmet, HMC and gear.
I know, with the skin.
I mean, I love it. I totally love it.
And I loved it so much as well because it's something that will never be used, and it's photoreal, but it will never be used.
Yeah, that's true.
Michael, release the raw cut. Release the Caucasian skin cut.
Release the validation cut.
There's a second thing that I loved on the lighting and compositing pipeline, which I need to mention, which I thought it was so smart. They have all these shows, all these live shows, which they did for real. They had real sets with real audiences, real people there on the concerts with the band and the musicians and obviously they have all these lights. You know, they have disco lights and they have like those faders and these lights that move around and go diagonally, and it's crazy. Sometimes it's crazy, the light show. And all this light show, or normally, because they did the real stage lights, all comes from a lighting board. Usually these lighting boards are super complex, and they usually are pre-programmed in advance, and they do these man, I've been involved on some of these things for fashion shows that when I was at the mill, when we were doing commercials. Man, this is crazy shit. It's like control centers with like 100 lights, all synchronized with the song and all synchronized with the music, moving up and down, and it's crazy. And of course, Weta, because, you know, why not? They went in and they got the data from the lighting board, and then that was not enough. They went in and replicated in a 3D model the entire lighting rig, a replica of the lighting rig that they had on set, and then loaded the programming of the lights and matched it to the plates. So the lights of the Udina and the Maya scene are actually moving synchronized with the plates of the footage by using the data of the lighting, of the real lighting board. This is so smart. This is so smart because you don't have to animate it by hand. You don't have to do anything. It's done. It's there.
Yeah.
It just syncs with timecode.
Yeah.
It is so cool.
Yes. And when I talked to Weta and the other folks about this, they said that they'd actually had projects before where they'd had access to a lighting board, but they'd never been able to spend the time synchronizing it, as you say. Yeah. And actually, where it was used in a significant way was in the Royal Albert Hall My Way sequence. Yeah. That's one, Hugo, that we're going to spend a bit more time on in a mini episode as an exclusive just for Patreon users. So when you've watched this episode, go and support us at the Patreon, and you'll get a lot more information about how they shot that Royal Albert Hall sequence and then did the visual effects for it. It's actually quite fascinating because of the way plates were shot in Melbourne and then plates were shot in the real Royal Albert Hall, which is incredible. So more info on that in our special Patreon mini app at patreon.com/VFX Notes. Those lighting board things are incredible. The film is full, Hugo, of individual solutions to separate kinds of problems, you know. And so, as we say, Weta can do digital apes, but they also had to tackle lots of other little things, big things, in the film as well.
Yeah. I think Weta is now starting to become... They're starting to have this kind of like... this approach of similar... We talked about this on the Planet of the Apes episode. This complete physically accurate approach of simulation, of growing trees, of growing fur, of getting skeletons, of getting breathing mechanisms, of this entire philosophy of doing full real simulation of the world is really paying off dividends, because they've been doing that for like a few decades now. And now it's really where the fun comes on, because now they can start with a film like this where they do a completely for real accurate representation of the world, but then they can bend it and make it stylized and make it something else. Like many times on this movie where you see something that is real, but it's not, because it couldn't exist. And so it's like, it's really cool, and I can't wait to see what they do next, because I'm starting to think that they have now cracked the simulation world. And now it's almost like, you know, in the past when you saw how painting became so photoreal, and then somehow we moved on to Impressionism, and then moved on to Cubism, and then we moved on to modern painting. I'm really looking forward to see what Weta is going to do next with this simulation power, and how much they can bend reality to make these incredibly creative approaches, especially when they're dealing with a creative director like they are in this case. With these really creative directors like Michael and Wes, and all these directors that have been doing like some astonishing, really off-the-wall shots that we've never seen before, really, so which has been cool.
Absolutely. Well, it's been lots of fun talking about Better Man, Hugo.
Come on, Ian. You promised me before we did the episode that you were going to sing for 5 minutes an amazing Robbie Williams song. You have the mic there. Go on. Go for it.
Look, give the audience what they want. Here we go.